disappear. Have no fear, disappear. Have no fear, disappear.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by echoing everyone's sentiments of thanking the organizers and all the sponsors of this fantastic symposium. It's been really remarkable. Let me just make sure that I get to where I want to start here. I hope that you're in the mood to listen to some music, because I've got a lot for you. But not that. That's the end. Come on. There we go. All those who appreciate rap music understand the extent to which it has always been an expression of confrontation and appropriation, simultaneously rejecting, embracing, and crossing borders. This rebel music that Rupa Hakka analyzes in her discussion of subcultures paradoxically allows for tremendous mainstream commercial success while keeping the door open to voices that come from the margins and push boundaries. Indeed, as Steve Cannon explained already a decade ago, hip-hop has reigned in France precisely because of its ability to express the perspective of those who were traditionally considered outsiders. And I quote Cannon, "Part of the explanation for hip-hop's success in France lies in the presence in France of approximately 15 million people who are either officially foreign or whose family is of minority ethnic origin." Such was the case from the early days of the French hip-hop scene, born from far-off relations in the US as the numerous detailed histories of the birth of French rap have illustrated. More recently, this trend has only grown in scale. Globalization has elevated hip-hop to a transnational trend that provides a global venue and voice for the traditionally voiceless margins. And you'll hear a lot of themes today that we already spoke about yesterday, including globalization. The identity politics at play in such a move are obviously complex. If hip-hop culture originates as a uniquely American phenomenon, drawing on struggles that are inherent to our cultural heritage here, then it would logically stand that whatever adoption or appropriation that takes place, and indeed the term translation wouldn't be inaccurate, it would seemingly suggest that elements of the American scene are reimagined by the borrowers, in this case, French rappers and hip-hop artists. As Adam Crims has argued, rap music is, of course, a profoundly impure product, one that has by no means lost its origins as an African-American vernacular practice, but in which, nevertheless, that origin survives in transformed resonances, gestures, and counter-gestures, and in newly relocalized cultural inflections. In other words, this borrowing and exchange enables not only the creation of other distinct and clearly identifiable hip-hop identities based on a certain set of cultural, historical, and ethnic criteria, but also the inextricable connections between them. In this respect, hip-hop cultures around the world represent what Gene and John Komaroff call a counter-nation, a unifying force for the world's youth that marries inclusion and exclusion. This underlying theme of counter-nation, I'd like to argue today, is one of confrontation and métissage. Of course, rap has always existed in dialogue with other musical genres, including Run DMC's genre-bending cover on their 1986 album Raising Hell of the Aerosmith song Walk This Way, which was without a doubt the biggest hit in the early years of the then fledgling subcategory rap rock. While Walk This Way was, and I don't have a clip of that, but everyone knows it. I only brought clips of things that we don't know. While Walk This Way was perhaps the first commercial success in which the two genres coexisted within the same musical space, Trisha Rose is right to point out that beats selected by hip-hop producers and DJs have always come from, and continue to draw from, an extraordinary range of musics. Plenty of similar examples abound in the rich tradition of French rap. As with Walk This Way, early confrontation of multiple genres went well beyond sampling, a practice that frequently results in the negotiation of multiple genres. Think of the 1999 Parisien du Nord, the collaboration of Rai artist Cheb Mami and French rapper Kamel. In France, the confrontation of rap and rock produced the 2009 album L'Angle Mort, a word for word, a dead angle. This is the French expression for a blind spot. The album's participants represent a combination of well-known names from both rock and rap. On the one hand, Serge Tessoguet, guitars for Noir Désir, the tremendously successful French rock group of the 1980s and 1990s, and more recently, one of the founding members of the Zone Libre trio. And on the other, rappers Amé from the rap group La Rumeur and La Rappeuse, Kazé of the group Anfalch. The group's showdown of rock and rap was even played up in its promotional materials. An early version of the CD bore a marketing sticker that read, and the quotations from these things are translated into English so that you understand what I'm saying. The meeting between the abrasive guitars of Serge Tessoguet from Noir Désir and the blistering lyrics from Cazé and Amé of La Rumeur. Abrasive guitars, blistering lyrics, the ensemble presented against a backdrop of collision, angle mort referring to those threats that we cannot see, and finally, war. Zone libre refers specifically to the free zone of France during the Second World War, nicknamed the zone nono for zone non occupée, a non-occupied zone. Thus, we have swirling notions of threats that are hard to pick up and a space that is free and protected, but not entirely a safe home base amidst a major conflict. This project's forced collision of rap and rock came about because the musicians recognized in each other a shared political imperative, what we could call a common counternational identity. As Tessoguet explained in an interview, we share some common ground, for example, against the entertainment that takes over, the world of commerce that ruins everything. We share a kind of rage in our music and our lyrics. Rage is a good engine. As Hamé explained, members of this project were conscious of the fact that this rage against the machine was political, both in its objectives and in its very formation. And I quote Hamé, "We're trying to formulate artistic counter-propositions, to break down barriers, to expose angle mort or blind spots. It's politically engaged rap out of the working class areas with experimental rock trio. As such, it's political. L'angle mort is part of a space and time that eludes control, vigilance, and authority." Of course, Hamé was the best situated to speak to political blind spots, as he had already spent significant time in the spotlight of a very public political and legal affair beginning in September 2002. La Rumeur's first album included a magazine with a text attacking the police and its treatment of immigrants and their descendants immigrants and their descendants in La Banlieue, which is the area around major French cities that is most often the source of social inequality, immigrant populations, and rap and hip-hop. Then Minister of the Interior Nicolas Sarkozy filed charges of defamation against Hamé, and after years of deliberation, increased press and sales for albums by La Rumeur, and acquittals followed by persistence by the government led by then President Sarkozy, Hamé was acquitted in 2008, and then finally once more in 2010. The fact that L'Angle Mort, the album you see on the screen, listed Hamé not just as Hamé, but Hamé/La Rumeur, you see at the bottom, even though he was the only member from the La Rumeur crew to appear on the album, could be read as a reference to this episode, or at least more generally to the political confrontation that this project sought to bring out of the blind spots and resituate front and center in the political discourse of the day. When Hamé left to pursue some solo projects, he was replaced by B. James from the crew Anne Falch for the 2011 album Les Contes du Chaos. With its slogan Rap de fils d'immigrés, or Rap of Sons of Immigrants, Anne Falch tends to be even more politically engaged than La Rumeur, attacking the commercialization of mainstream rap perpetuated by well-known outlets like the radio station Skyrock. The addition of B. James thus would have led listeners to believe that the resulting album would be even more hardcore in its delivery. The album's very title, Les Contes du Chaos, suggests as much, as it simultaneously evokes tales of chaos, literally word for word, and through the homonym with the French term KO, which is just K-O, a knockout. So tales of the knockout as well. Somewhere between tales of chaos and being knocked out, echoes of a violent backdrop persist. Once again, the album's marketing extended this theme to the confrontation of genres. First, in the taglines that adorn the shrink wrap that you see here, when rap is in the free zone and rock is in the red zone, the sound is an uppercut, and the verb a right-left hook. Zone libre, free rock, crosses swords with the free rap of Cazé and B. James. Then the use of the word verses, rather than the traditional with or featuring, the latter so prevalent that the abbreviation FEAT, it commonly appears on French albums. So verses really underscores, I think, the notion of a battle between two musical conceptions of freedom. Such is the feeling from the album's opening track, Vengeance, or Revenge, with cutting guitars that set the tone for the lyrical and musical offensive to come, anchoring a rhythm for a tempo that is heavy and oppressive in the manner of a march that is slow and irreversible, which anticipates the anxiety-provoking poetry that Cazé so cogently distills. so that you can sense that there's some tension building and it's threatening, and later in the song, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, you hear this. So you get a sense here, even if you don't read French, that there's I'll explain it for you briefly, that there's an incredible amount of disgust. Mon dégoût est à bout, he's at the end of his rope, and the pent-up violence and anger is such that it just ends in a terrible explosion. And what's amazing, and so that fits with the notion of the song of vengeance or revenge. What's remarkable is the sang-froid of this act of revenge at the end of the words you see on the screen. Je souris au brasier et rentre à la maison. I smile at the inferno and head back home. So he's completely at peace with this just total destruction. Je vais tout réduire en charbon. I'm just going to annihilate everything and reduce it to dust. It's even more nerve-wracking with the alarming tension of the accompanying guitars. It's a pure chaos, as the album's title promises. As Tesogé explained, the creation of a shared musical space, chaotic and yet unified in its chaos, was a natural extension of each genre. And this is Tesogé saying, the articulation between rock and rap for us is totally natural. There's no contradiction. It's fluid, and we dig being together. Dig was kiffe. In fact, the artists define their own sound as being a combination of, on the one hand, a rock sound that spews from speakers, and on the other, a rap that fails all tests of commercial viability, so it's really anti-commercial. This hybrid and marginal identity is flaunted throughout the album, perhaps nowhere more explicitly than in the menacing refrain from the album's final track, Aiguise-moi ça, sharpen that for me. It is in these two sets of lyrics that the complexity and even contradictions of the Zone Libre project are so well synthesized. Somewhere in the inevitable tension between marginalized and official, you see marginal, déclaré, officiel in the middle of what B. James is saying. This morass born of two genres and of bastards and slums, you see Croisé dans le bordel is kind of a morass. Les gros bâtards de guitare, cité dortoir is how we talk about slums and bastards, simultaneously expresses sardonically the delight in keeping the customer satisfied. In the second to last line, c'est qu'on adore bien s'occuper de notre clientèle. It's completely joking. And in the last line, an invitation to come in closer to the very real threat that their next move will be slitting our throats. Stick out your neck and while we sharpen our scalpels. The confrontation here, political and musical, brings to the fore all of the dangers inherent in blind spots, what threats lurk in the spots that cannot be seen, and the risks of seeing them at all. Of course, rock is not the only genre into which rap has bled through. In fact, rap and jazz have been closely linked from the first days of rap in both American and French contexts. As Crims reminds us, representations of jazz, both within and outside hip-hop culture, often invoke a validation related to a presumed status as a black classical music, or some related musical and American modernism. Early manifestations of this mixed genre ancestry, what we could call a musical métissage, include the Fresh Prince's sidekick DJ Jazzy Jeff, and in the French context, the interlude jazz from IM's 1991 album De la Planète Mars. I had to get a little Marseille for Alain Philippe. The position of the extremely brief mention of jazz on IM's album is worth noting, as the track marks the segue between the song in which IM presents itself, prevents and defines itself in the present, before leading to the song that harkens back to a colonial past, Tam Tam de l'Afrique, Tam Tam from Africa, which itself seeks a pre-colonial ancestral identity to elevate above the struggling forces of colonialism. That same year, in his song À temps partiel, MC Solar explained that if rap succeeded, it's because jazz was its spark. Si le rap excelle, le jazz en est l'étincelle. For French rapper Oxmo Puccino, already well established thanks to his successful debut album Opéra Puccino in 1998 and its follow-up L'amour est mort in 2001, the idea of a musically genre-bending project grew out of boredom with hip-hop and with himself. Such was the genesis of the Lipopet Bar concept album released by the jazz label Blue Note in 2006. Working with a group of jazz musicians dubbed the Jazz Bastards, again the theme of bastard and illegitimacy underscoring the marginalized status that these hybrid projects claim for themselves. This album drew inspiration from film noir and from Billie Holiday. Puccino explained the process of going beyond the limits that he saw in hip-hop in this quote. So and this is from an interview where the interviewer says, "How did the Oxmo and Le Jazz Bastard project come to be?" And Puccino said, "It grew out of boredom. Boredom with the music that renews itself less and less quickly, hip-hop, and a desire to go further than myself." The dozen tight tracks on this album are as many stories into which are woven the fictitious regulars who hang out in the Lipopet Bar. The diva Billy, the gangster Tito, the bouncer Black Popeye, and other characters with names such as Barbie and Tuki. And I'll play a little clip of it for you here if I can find the cursor. There we go. Certainly, Lipopet Bar stands out as an ambitious project, and in this respect, as a concept album, it is one in the long tradition of concept albums, including albums that we know from other contexts like Sgt. Pepper and Songs in the Key of Life. Even going back to Ray Charles's Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, such grandes œuvres marked as Lipopet Bar did for Puccino, an important opportunity for an artist to branch out from an established style and explore his or her range through other musical worlds. And yet, while Lipopet Bar was certainly a departure, it made no pretenses at contributing to any sort of counter-nation. The album remained a purely aesthetic project, turned in on itself. A lack of social engagement, commenting on little beyond the fictitious world and its characters, permeates much of the album. In fact, the album's very title evokes what could be called confrontation light. As Puccino explained about the word lipopette, it comes from Sapper Lipopette, which is kind of a very rough equivalent to Gosh G. Willikers, or something that Ned Flanders would say on The Simpsons. So it comes from Captain Haddock of Tintin. It was his way of saying merde, or shit. I wanted something a little funny because of all the little cafes, all of the banlieue dives that have a little bit of dark mystery which contrasts with names that are often pretty funny, like La Cavalière, Le Rallye, Chez Loulou. I wanted to transcribe that feeling, which is in contrast with the sound. That was what Puccino said. A little cartoonish merde from the comics, specifically from Tintin's lovable alcoholic friend. This is not the stuff that counter-nations are made of. In a word, Puccino's musical Métissage was just that, musical. Certainly there were risks involved, but they were limited to this one artist, and the successes and failures that all artists meet as part of their trajectory. Similarly, Puccino's move and its concomitant risks were an aesthetic rather than a political statement, and while the Lipopet Bar was an unqualified commercial success, it lacked the social imperative that marks so much of hip-hop, of speaking out on behalf of the silent, of contesting inequality and unfairness, of shedding light on society's blind spots. If Zone Libre explores counternational spaces, then the last group I'd like to consider here pushes further for an international, worldwide counter-identity. The project called Binary Audio Misfits, made up of the French group Expérience and the Texan rap collective The Word Association, offers a stunning and powerful métissage, not only of genre bending, but of blending languages and styles as well. In this respect, it expands on Imani Perry's statement that good music often has a beauty identifiable across the boundaries of nation and culture. And yet a musical composition and musical forms in general have identities rooted in community. The community might be as small as an artistic collective or as vast as a continent. Binary Audio Misfits reach even further, crossing continents and spanning the counternational globe. The history of the Binary Audio Misfits projects goes back to the 1990s, when the band Diabolo Gum from the mythical label Lithium produced some of the most important indie rock music in France. The The group's now legendary album Numéro 3 was already pushing the limits of its own experimental, minimalist hardcore rock, and doing so with sampling. Not only with the sudden incursion of a clip from Richard Hell and the Voidoids' Blank Generation in Diabolo Gum's song of the same name, but also with the song for which they created music to accompany Françoise Lebrun's monologue from Jean Eustache's 1976 film La Maman et la Putain. I'd like to play a clip of that here. So what you have here is the video from the film and Françoise Lebrun's monologue, and the music that you hear is what Diabolo Gum created to support her. And so the song that resulted on Diabolo Gum's album has her lyrics taken from the film and the group's music. So that gives you an idea about that. Get back to this. The review of Numéro 3 in Les Inrecuptibles back in the day echoed this notion of reaching far beyond the limits of the rock genre. A disc that overflows, that flays, that eludes reason for Diabolo Gum, overcome with fever, pushed by doubt and a gnawing fear. In her 1997 review, Françoise Marie Santucci even evokes rap. And I quote, "Diabolo Gum, quartet from Toulouse, favors musical and lyrical disjointedness. Basically, it's like nothing else, a sort of dissonant and melodic bass rock, situationist, if you want to simplify, for a white rap which flows its stories of dissatisfaction." Beyond borrowing from a multitude of sources and acknowledging a host of influences, lead singer Michel Clou's spoken word vocals push the notion of a musical genre, as we hear from the outset of Numéro 3 in the song De la neige en été, or Snowfall in Summer.
Quand j'ai ouvert les yeux, le monde avait changé. Au milieu du mois d'août, je vois les glaces, neigé, il n'y avait plus personne, les terrasses décapées. Tous les magasins étaient restés fermés, on aurait dit la guerre, rien ne se fermait. Sans repas de famille, sans électricité, il n'y avait rien à faire, il fallait rien faire. Il n'y avait rien à faire, incroyable. Aujourd'hui, c'est des années, pour bien le scénario.
The lyrics, retaining rhythm and meter, sometimes verses and choruses, result in a hybrid of rock, poetry, perhaps slam poetry, and the white rap that Santucci refers to. If Rupa Huck notes that, quote, rapping spoken word form dispenses with the traditional musical requirement of singing in tune, we see here in this song and in much of Diabolo Gum that this lack of melody is not at all unique to rap. The last point worth noting is Diabolo Gum's social engagement, as the hybrid musical identity is just as much a reflection of the alienation that situates this album in the counter-nation, in keeping with Crims's notion of relocalized cultural inflections. As Clou explained in an interview, obviously we're pretty negative, but it's just a first step. Saying what you think, that's being positive. That's the reality. For people of our age, their total disgust is constantly gnawing at them. Being unemployed, minimum wage, it's not pretty. After Diabolo Gum broke up in 1998, Clou went on to create a new group, Expérience, based on the same principles of experimental hardcore rock. And it was this group that discovered, through the wonders of MySpace, the rap collective The Word Association, based in San Marcos, Texas. Sending lyrics one way, beats another, laying guitars in French over English language hip-hop, the result, baptized Binary Audio Misfits, pulsates with international and counternational energy without the players ever having to leave the comforts of their home studio. Of course they did, and they would play together, but initially it was just that. This is indeed example of the deployment of oral traditions in an age of electronic reproduction. As a cultural discourse and political activity, it thus speaks to both residual and emergent realities. The album's cover art, which you see, reflects these realities. A skin tone that is difficult to identify, the familiar clenched fist signalizing the struggle against paradigms of power, and the tool being wielded as a combination of brass knuckles and the USB key. Confluence was kind enough to give us a USB key, but it did not come with brass knuckles. Next time we want that. So what you see here is packing a punch that is not only physical, but audible, even through the title word, BAM. Fighting the man with a digital flow of 480 megabits per second. Such is Binary Audio Misfits project. The album opens with a bilingual intro that suggests not precisely comforting harmony, but rather the complexity and tension inherent in the coexistence of layers, coming together at the end into one collaborative voice, synthesizers yielding synthesis.
Toulouse, France, the rock band EXP, also known as Experience. From Austin, Texas, members of the hip-hop group, the Word Association, together they are Binary Audio Misfits.
Have you send it, will travel. The increasing ease with which one can cross geographic boundaries leads to waves of what Jason Toynbee and Byron Dweck term migrating music. Indeed, mediated music has become nearly ubiquitous, and with it, genres of popular music honed in the core of the world system, such as Tin Pan Alley standards, jazz, rock, rap, and soul. These are indeed the emancipatory possibilities of new technologies and the readiness of marginalized and oppressed populations to employ them for humane ends, for shedding restricting social identities and embracing new possibilities of a life without hierarchy and exploitation. Worthy of its Diabologum lineage, this project, too, is situated in the counternational realm, straddling several genres at once and pushing the political and social potential of its message. Front and center, put on display, and held up for questioning are what Trisha Rose calls rap's primary thematic concerns, identity and location. In addition, there is even further hybridization. Unlike the Zone Libre project, in which the traditional DJ was replaced by rock musicians, but the MCs were retained, and unlike the Lipopet Bar album, in which Puccino remained the MC, but with the Jazz Bastard backing him, Binary Audio Misfits went even further, producing a collaboration of MCs from both the Expérience Trio and the Word Association Collective. This project cuts even deeper and undermines the oft-held myth of solitary genius, aligning itself with rap's African roots since, and I quote, African music is participatory, collective, and collaborative. Rhythms are layered on top of one another as a dialogue. Hearing one enables the others to make sense. The Binary Audio Misfits project is a perfect example of what Adam Crims called the hip-hop sublime, the product of dense combinations of musical layers. Given rap's long-time heavy insistence on DJs, technology has always played a central role. It is only natural, then, that its ability to create increasing complexity as technology advances will only continue to grow exponentially. Counternational identity is forged from the album's first song, Get Loud or Get Dyin'. The opening words, we got a mind for movement, set the tone for this worldwide collective. The subject pronoun we indicating not only the collective voice of Binary Audio Misfits, but also an extension of what Anthony Pequeux has pointed out about how rap music takes the form of spatially deferred experience. For example, the system of pronouns through which rappers address their listeners. This multiplicity of voices reaches out to include us all. It all laid down on the back and forth undercurrent of rap and rock, English and French, all expressing alienation of all sorts, and particularly kind of in an infinite way in the anti line of the French verse that we'll hear now.
Stand on the wall, back against the wall, hands in our pockets, go to the too rock when to populate static cities. Everything moves, no one ever leading their crash scenes too. Now is not the time to pick up a fault and damage is all locked up on hold. Now is the time to take control of a decision being made for you. Marginal, associé, lunatique, binaire, une individu, critique, objet, universel, automatique. Anti-anxiolytique. Une médecine rare et spécifique. Faire du bruit ou bien crever d'ennui. Une médecine rare et spécifique. Faire du bruit ou bien finir zombie. Allez, on est smart with it.
This anti-establishment mode contributes quite clearly to what George Lipsitz describes as an international dialogue built on the imagination and ingenuity of slum dwellers from around the globe suffering from the effects of the international austerity economy imposed on urban areas by transnational corporations and their concentrated control over capital. It follows logically, then, that binary audio misfits use new technologies to express their emergent realities. The zeros and ones of this digital project are isolated bits and bytes. Each one of them, each one of us, is always precariously, potentially a misfit, a throwaway part not recognized by the machine. And just as Get Loud or Get Dying echoes Puccino's boredom come muse in the, I should have shown the Faire du bruit ou bien crever d'ennui toward the end, make noise or die of boredom. It comes as little surprise that the misfit identity is expressed particularly well in another song on the album entitled Sound Verses, which of course plays on the notion of verses of poetry or verses of lyrics, and verses, as we talked about earlier with the Zone Libre project of Confrontation. This is nothing short of a technological, counternational hip-hop manifesto, built of a poetic compendium of misfit bits that directly trouble both identity and location. A corrupted file, a fragment of confusing discourse, a ripped phrase, an erased letter, a misplaced invisible file, a trace of a lost ancient language, a secure backup. Somehow these ill-fitting, purloined, or forgotten random parts, epitomes of the kinds of fragments of chaos that Zone Libre evokes, exist and even rule in a sort of supranational, what I've been calling thus far counternational, plane of nothingness. Ultimately, the pressures of this range, stretching from the disposable and insignificant all the way to the divine, are too much to bear, and they will eventually result in explosion and destruction. The album's tour de force, Brain Drain Generation, rails against the post-9/11 world from what can be described as ground zero of their anti-capitalist counternation. The juxtaposition of residual and emergent reality seems to be the only way out. The present moment is so rotten, it requires thinking outside the system. Later in the album, in the song Visionary People, we hear J'ai l'impression qu'aujourd'hui, les derniers visionnaires sont tous auteurs de science-fiction. I get the impression today that the last visionaries are all science fiction writers. Marginal, binaire, audio, you see the last lines here on the right-hand column, outsider et en stéréo. And one thing that's really interesting about this project is the number of words that are that exist both in English and in French. So I don't need to translate marginal for you. Binaire is close to binary. Audio, and then also the English words that are used in French, outsider, en stéréo as well. So it really helps to create some sort of universal message, despite the language barrier. Such is the plight of today's counter-nation. Spliced into the smallest particles of identity, these bits and bytes of marginalized audio are simultaneously outsiders and unified in stereo. As Tricia Rose reminds us, rap is at once part of the dominant text and yet always on the margins. The three projects presented here offer different takes on the eternal struggle between center and margins, musically, aesthetically, politically, globally. Perhaps what they have to tell us about recent developments in French rap music is that it continues to offer an incredibly rich diversity of approaches. Despite the boredom that Puccino expressed earlier, French rap music, in its ability to confront and engage other musical genres and in traditions, remains a fertile terrain for experimentation. Rock versus rap, rap fused with jazz, an international and bilingual hardcore rap blend. It seems that there are no limits to where French rap music can go or to what it can do. Across countries, languages, and musical genres, the themes that unite are those that push rap increasingly out of the banlieue, into the hands of the world's consumers, and into the ears and minds of all those who will listen. As rap's ability to engage with an increasing number of genres, traditions, and people continues to grow, so will its relevance and its ability to shine a light on blind spots of its milieu, constantly in evolution, like the music itself. Thank you very much.
Telling lies to an empty room, too much too late to undo.